Los Angeles, a city where dreams either come true or dissolve in the hot haze over the asphalt, greeted the evening with a soft sunset light. In the suburbs of Pasadena, where houses were buried in the greenery of palm trees and neatly trimmed lawns, stood the cozy two-story house of the Clark family. Its light walls and large windows radiated warmth, as if promising that harmony reigned inside. But as in any house, there were shadows hidden behind the facade. Emma Clark stood at the stove, stirring pasta sauce. The aroma of tomatoes and basil filled the air, mingling with the faint scent of freshly cut grass that wafted through the open window. Her movements were practiced. Almost mechanical years of practice had turned cooking into a ritual she performed without much thought. But today, her mind was elsewhere. Her long, brown hair, slightly streaked with gray, was pulled back into a loose bun, and her blue eyes, once bright under the spotlights, now held a quiet weariness. Emma, former lead singer of a rock band Neon Pulse, quit the stage 10 years ago to raise her family. And yet, standing at the stove, she sometimes found herself humming old tunes, the same ones that once made thousands of people scream her name. "Mom, are you singing again?" came the clear voice of Sophie, her 12-year-old daughter, who burst into the kitchen holding a phone. Her dark curls bounced in time with her steps, and her eyes sparkled with the same sparkle that Emma once had. Emma smiled, wiping her hands on her apron. "Am I singing?" she winked, although she knew perfectly well that she was humming a line from Wildfire, their biggest hit. "Just checking to make sure I haven't forgotten the words." Sophie rolled her eyes, but the corners of her lips twitched into a smile. "Mom, you're so weird. Why don't you sing anymore? You were like a star." "I was," Emma shrugged, turning back to the sauce. "And now I'm the star of the kitchen. Go get Liam, dinner's almost ready." Sophie snorted and ran out of the kitchen, shouting, "Liam, get off the couch. It's time for dinner." Emma shook her head, but her smile quickly faded. Sophie's question, asked so casually, seemed to prick her somewhere deep. Why wasn't she singing? The answer was more complicated than she could explain to a 12-year-old. The stage, the crowd, the lights, it was all a thing of the past, like an old movie she sometimes replayed in her head. But every time she thought about those days, a strange feeling arose in her chest, a mixture of longing and relief. The door slammed and Jake Clark, her husband, walked into the house. His dark hair was slightly tousled, and the shirt he'd tucked neatly into his pants that morning now looked a little wrinkled. An engineer at an aerospace company, he spent his days drawing and calculating, designing drones that, as he liked to say, would one day change the sky. Jake was tall, with broad shoulders and calm brown eyes that always seemed confident. But today, there was a weariness in his movements. "Hey," he said, dropping his briefcase by the door and walking over to Emma. He kissed her temple, lingering a second longer than usual. "You smell amazing." "Thank you," Emma smiled, but her gaze was absent-minded. "How is your day?" "Long," Jake shrugged, taking off his jacket. "This new project is really draining me, but we're close to a breakthrough. How about you?" "Oh, the usual. Sophie's arguing with her maths teacher again. Liam's building a cushioned fort." She laughed, but her voice sounded a little strained. Jake nodded, but his gaze lingered on her. He had always been good at noticing little things, the slight tension in her shoulders, the way she fidgeted with the edge of her apron when she was nervous. But he didn't say anything, just smiled and went to wash his hands. Dinner went on as usual. Sophie chatted about school. Liam, an 8-year-old whirlwind of energy, talked about his new invention, a catapult made of spoons and rubber bands. Jake listened, teasing the kids, but Emma was unusually quiet. She smiled, answered, but her mind was elsewhere. Jake noticed, but again said nothing. After dinner, when the kids had run off to watch cartoons, Emma was clearing away the dishes, and Jake was helping her. The kitchen was silent, broken only by the clink of plates and the sound of running water. And then her phone, lying on the table, vibrated. Emma glanced at the screen, and her heart skipped a beat. The number was unfamiliar, but the area code was New York. She froze, holding a wet plate in her hands. "Are you going to answer?" Jake looked at her, wiping his hands with a towel. Yes, of course. Emma quickly put down the plate and picked up the phone. Hello? Emma Clark. The voice on the other end was husky, familiar, like an old chord. It's Tony Brown, your good old manager. Remember me? Emma felt the blood rush to her cheeks. Tony Brown was the man who had once pulled Neon Pulse from small clubs to big stages. She didn't speak to him for 10 years. Tony? Her voice wavered. Of course I remember. How are you? Things are going well? Things are going well, baby. Tony laughed, and his laughter transported Emma back to those days when she stood on stage, feeling the crowd breathe in unison with her. Look, I'm not just calling. We've got an idea. A farewell tourney and pulse. All the old hits, the whole old team. And without you, it's not the same. What do you say? Emma froze. Her fingers gripped the phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. She could feel Jake's eyes on her, but she couldn't turn to look at him. Tour? She asked again, as if checking to make sure she had heard correctly. When? We're leaving in a month. Seattle, Nashville, New York, the whole country. 2 months, Em. This is your chance to come back, at least for a little while. Emma was silent. Images swirled in her head. Stage lights, guitar riffs, the crowd screaming. And then there were Sophie and Liam's faces, Jake's warm gaze, their home, their life. She swallowed. Tony, this is unexpected. I need to think. Sure, baby, think about it. But don't delay. We all want you to be with us. Call me tomorrow, okay? Okay, Emma answered quietly and hung up. She slowly placed the phone on the table, feeling the silence in the kitchen become almost tangible. Jake looked at her, his eyebrows raised slightly. Who was that? He asked, and there was no suspicion in his voice, only curiosity. Tony Brown. Emma turned to him, trying to smile. My old manager. He asked me to go on tour with Neon Pulse. Farewell tour. 2 months. Jake froze for a second, but his face remained calm. He nodded, as if considering her words. Tour, he repeated. And what do you think? Emma shrugged, trying to appear casual, but her fingers were fiddling nervously with the edge of her apron. I don't know. It's just unexpected. I didn't think they'd remember me. Why wouldn't they remember? Jake smiled, but his eyes were serious. You were their star. Emma looked at him, trying to understand what was behind his words. Jake had always supported her, even when she had decided to leave music. But there was something else in his voice, now not anger, not resentment, but some kind of quiet concern. I haven't decided yet, she said, looking away. It's just a call, nothing serious. Sure, Jake nodded, but his gaze lingered on her a little longer than usual. I'll go check on Liam and his pillows. He walked out of the kitchen, leaving Emma alone. She looked at the phone, then at the empty stove where the sauce had gone cold. Her heart was beating faster than she wanted. The tour, the stage, the music, everything she had given up for this life, and everything that still lived inside her, like an echo. Later, after the kids were asleep, Emma sat in the living room with her laptop on her lap. Jake was in his office, sorting through some blueprints. She opened YouTube and, barely holding her breath, typed in Neon Pulse Live. The first video that popped up was of them performing in Chicago in 2013. Emma turned it on, and the sound of Ryan's guitar, Casey's drums, and her own voice filled the room. There she was, wearing a black leather jacket, holding a microphone, her hair flying, her eyes sparkling. The crowd was screaming, and on screen, Emma was smiling like she owned the world. She didn't notice Jake entering the room. He stood in the doorway, holding a mug of coffee and looking at the screen. Emma jumped when she felt his presence and quickly closed her laptop. No need, Jake said quietly, sitting down next to her. Look if you want. It's just nostalgia. Emma tried to smile, but her voice trembled. Stupid, right? Nothing stupid, Jake looked at her, and there was such tenderness in his eyes that Emma felt uneasy. You were incredible, and maybe you still can be. Jake, She hesitated, unsure how to express what was bubbling inside. I don't know what I want. This is all so sudden. He nodded, placing the mug on the table. You don't have to decide right now. But if that's what you need, I won't stand in the way. His words sounded sincere, but there was something unsaid about them. Emma looked at him, trying to understand what he was feeling. But Jake only smiled, kissed her forehead, and stood up. I'm going to bed. Don't stay up too late. When he left, Emma opened her laptop again. The video was still paused, and her face on the screen was staring right back at her. She pressed play, and the music filled the room again. But now, listening to her voice, she felt not only nostalgia, but also fear. Fear that if she returned to the stage, she would never be able to return to this house. And fear that if she stayed here, she would forever lose that part of herself that once burned brighter than the stars. Warm light from the chandelier lit up the dining room of the Clark's house, reflecting off the polished wood of the table where the family was gathered. Steaming plates of pasta covered in thick tomato sauce sat on the table, along with a basket of garlic bread that Liam had already broken into, leaving crumbs on the tablecloth. Outside, the palm trees swayed in the garden, and the scent of jasmine wafted in on the evening breeze. Emma sat at the head of the table, her fingers fiddling nervously with the edge of her napkin. Across from her, Jake poured apple juice for the children, his movements measured, almost ritualistic. Sophie chatted about the school play, her voice ringing like a bell, and Liam, his head buried in his plate, was building something out of spaghetti that resembled a bridge. Emma took a deep breath, steeling herself. She had been going over Tony's call the day before in her head, and what had seemed like a vague decision had become a reality by morning. She had called Tony that morning while Jake was at work and the kids were at school, and said yes. Now she had to tell her family. She looked at Sophie, whose curls were bouncing as she spoke, then at Liam, who was trying to catch a mouthful of spaghetti with his tongue, and finally at Jake. His brown eyes met hers, and for a second she thought he already knew. Guys, Emma coughed, her voice coming out a little louder than she'd intended. All three of them looked at her. Sophie stopped mid-sentence, Liam froze with his fork in his hand, and Jake slowly set the pitcher of juice down on the table. What? Sophie leaned forward, her eyes lit up with curiosity. Did you screw up in the kitchen again? Emma laughed, but it was forced. No, I didn't screw anything up. She hesitated, looking at Jake. His face was calm, but his eyebrows were slightly raised, as if he were expecting a blow. I wanted to tell you something. Remember Tony calling yesterday, my old manager? The one that looks like Santa Claus, but without the beard? Liam asked, and Sophie snorted. Liam, he doesn't look like Santa Claus. Emma shook her head, but the corners of her lips twitched. He asked me to go on tour with Nyan Pulse, farewell tour, and I agreed. There was silence. Sophie was the first to break it, her eyes widening and her voice rising to a shriek. Seriously? Mom, are you going to sing again? Like a rock star? That's so cool. She jumped up from her chair, almost knocking over her glass. Can I go with you? Please, please. Emma smiled, but her gaze quickly darted to Jake. He was silent, his fingers slowly twirling his fork in his hand. Liam, noticing the tension, shrugged and went back to his spaghetti. It's cool, I guess, he muttered, but I still don't understand why you need to sing when you can build robots. Emma looked at Jake, waiting for his reaction. He put down his fork and leaned back in his chair, his gaze looking off to the side, as if he were studying the pattern on the tablecloth. Jake, Emma called softly. Her voice was soft, but there was concern in it. What do you think? He slowly raised his eyes, and there was something in them that made her heart clench. Not anger, not resentment, but something deeper, as if he already saw where this might lead. A tour then, he said, his voice even, almost emotionless. For how long? 2 months, Emma answered, trying to sound confident. Seattle, Nashville, New York. This is the farewell tour, Jake. The last time. Then that's it. The last time, he repeated, and a barely perceptible irony flashed in his tone. Are you sure you need this? Emma felt irritation rise in her chest. She had expected questions, but his tone, calm and almost indifferent, hurt her more than she was willing to admit. Yes, I'm sure, she said, her voice a little sharper. This is my chance, Jake, to go back to myself, to who I was, at least for 2 months. Sophie, sensing the tension, stopped bouncing and sat back down, her eyes darting between her parents. Liam, as if nothing had happened, continued to build his bridge. Jake nodded, his lips pressed into a thin line. Go back to yourself, he repeated, and there was something in the words that made Emma feel guilty, though she couldn't understand why. Okay, if it makes you happy, I don't mind. His words hung in the air, heavy as the summer air before a storm. Emma looked at him, searching his face for some hint of what he was really feeling. But Jake was a master at hiding his emotions. Years of working on difficult projects had taught him to keep his temper in check. Thank you, she said quietly, but her voice wavered. She wanted to say something else, to explain why it was so important, but the words stuck in her throat. Mom, will you sing Wildfire? Sophie perked up again, her enthusiasm breaking the tension. This is your best song. I saw the video on YouTube. You're so cool there. Emma smiled, grateful for the change of subject. Maybe Sophie. Let's see what the guys in the band want to include in the setlist. Can I be your manager? Sophie folded her arms, feigning seriousness. I know how to manage Instagram. I can film you on stage. Oh, we'll talk about that, Emma laughed, but her gaze slid back to Jake. He was silent, staring at his plate as if the pasta had suddenly become the most interesting object in the room. Dinner continued, but the atmosphere had changed. Sophie continued to chat about how cool it would be to tell her friends that her mom was a rock star. Liam occasionally made comments about robots, and Emma and Jake exchanged short conversations, trying to avoid the topic of the tour. But every time their eyes met, Emma felt an invisible wall growing between them. After dinner, Emma cleared the table and Jake helped load the dishwasher. The kids ran into the living room, where Liam was having another pillow fight, judging by the laughter and sounds of things falling. Emma started to say something, but Jake beat her to it. When are you leaving? He asked, closing the dishwasher door. His tone was businesslike, as if he were asking about her appointment schedule. In 3 weeks, Emma answered, drying her hands on a towel. Rehearsals start in Hollywood in 10 days. I'll be gone a couple of days a week until the tour starts. Jake nodded, his gaze looking off to the side. What about the children? He asked. Have you thought about how this will affect them? Emma felt her cheeks heat up. Of course I thought about it. I won't disappear forever, Jake. It's only 2 months. You manage when I go to my mom's for the weekend. And Sophie's big now. She can help with Liam. I can handle it, he agreed, but there was something in his voice that made her pause. He looked at her, and for a second his mask of calm cracked. It's not just about the kids, Em. It's about us. Emma froze. She wanted to protest, to say he was being dramatic, but his words hurt her. She knew that the tour was not just a return to music. It was a return to the Emma who sang herself hoarse, danced in the rain at festivals, lived life without looking back. And she wasn't sure how Emma would fit in with the one standing in this kitchen. Jake, she began, but he raised his hand, stopping her. It's okay, he said, his voice even again. I just want you to be happy. If that's what you need, I'll support it. But his words did not calm her. On the contrary, they sounded like a sentence. Emma nodded, at a loss for words, and turned to the sink to hide the tears that had suddenly sprung to her eyes. Later, when the house was quiet, Jake retreated to his office on the second floor. The room was his sanctuary, the walls covered with blueprints, the desk littered with papers and drone models. He turned on a lamp, and its soft light illuminated the sketches of his latest project, a drone that could deliver supplies to remote areas. It was his passion, his way of leaving a mark on the world, the way music had been for Emma. He sat down at the table, but instead of working, he just stared at the drawing. The lines, the numbers, the calculations, they usually calmed him. gave him a sense of control. But today they seemed meaningless. He thought about how Emma had changed in the last 24 hours. Her eyes, usually so familiar, now glowed with something new, and it scared him. Not because he didn't trust her, but because he knew how much she loved the stage, and how much she had sacrificed by choosing him. Jake pulled an old photo out of his desk drawer him and Emma on their first date at a small bar in Santa Monica. She was wearing a t-shirt neon pulse, her hair was bright red, her smile was cheeky. He had fallen in love with her at first sight, with her energy, with her laughter. But he also knew that this Emma would always be a part of the one standing on the stage. And now that she had decided to go back there, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was losing her. He put the photo back and closed the drawer. His gaze fell on the blueprint for the drone, but he didn't see it. Instead, he saw her, on stage, under the lights, holding a microphone, and he wondered if she could come back to him the same way she left. Hidden behind a nondescript facade at the corner of Vine and Sunset, the Hollywood recording studio oozed history. The walls, covered with faded rock posters and yellowed photographs, echoed with hundreds of tunes born here over the decades. The air smelled of old wood, coffee, and the faintest hint of cigarettes, despite the strict no-smoking policy. Emma Clark stepped through the door, clutching the strap of her bag as if it were a life preserver. Her heart was beating unevenly, as it had before her first show all those years ago. Today was the first rehearsal, Neon Pulse for 10 years, and she felt both like an outsider and like she had come home. The studio was buzzing with chaotic energy. Technicians were fiddling with wires, testing microphones, and in the corner of the room, someone was tuning drums, pumping out sharp, staccato beats. Emma paused at the entrance, her eyes flickering over familiar but aged faces. Casey, the drummer with tattoos covering his arms like an adventure map, spotted her first. Her short, now graying hair was sticking out in all directions, and her smile was as wide as it had been in the old days. "Emma, what the hell, is that you?" Casey jumped up from her chair, throwing her chopsticks aside, and ran towards her, wrapping her in a tight hug. "I thought all you did was change diapers and bake pies now." Emma laughed, feeling the tension in her shoulders ease a little. "Pies aren't my thing, Case. But diapers, yeah, that was it." Casey stepped back, looking her up and down. "You look like a rock star, only in Gap jeans. Where's your leather jacket?" "In the cupboard, collecting dust," Emma smiled, but her voice wavered. She suddenly realized how much she had missed this, the ease, the teasing, the feeling that she belonged somewhere bigger than her kitchen. A low, hoarse voice came from the depths of the studio. "Emma Clark, queen of the stage, is back to steal the show once again." She turned around and saw Ryan Logan, the guitarist, Neon Pulse, leaning against the wall with a guitar in his hands. His dark hair, slightly longer than she remembered, fell into his eyes, and his smile held the same cheekiness that had once made her heart beat faster. Ryan had always been charismatic in human form, tall, with a slight casualness in his movements. He looked like he had just stepped off the stage. His black t-shirt with a faded logo of Clash and the worn jeans only reinforced this impression. "Ryan," Emma felt her cheeks warm. "Are you still wearing that shirt? It's older than Liam." "Hey, this is classic," he winked, throwing his guitar over his shoulder. "So are you. Ready to rock again?" Emma was about to come up with something witty, but her thoughts were interrupted by another voice. Tony Brown, the manager, walked into the studio waving a folder of papers. His belly was sticking out from under his jacket, and his horn-rimmed glasses were slid down to the tip of his nose. "Okay, gang, enough hugging," he barked, but his eyes were shining. "Emma, glad you're here. Without you, this tour would be like pizza without cheese. Come on, get to work." Emma nodded, feeling a familiar warmth swell within her. She walked to the center of the studio, where the microphones and amps were already set up. The rest of the band, bassist Marcus, a silent giant with a beard, and keyboardist Leela, whose bright purple hair stood out even in the dim light, greeted her with nods and smiles. This was her old crew, her second family, and yet, standing among them, Emma felt a little out of place. 10 years was a lifetime. Let's start with Wild Furion suggested, tuning his guitar. It's your anthems, Em. Oh, don't start, she rolled her eyes, but her lips twitched into a smile. Let's try. Just don't laugh if I forget the words. Casey tapped her drumsticks, keeping time, and the studio filled with sound. Ryan's first chord, sharp and clear, struck her nerves like electricity. Emma closed her eyes, her fingers tightening around the microphone, and as she began to sing, her voice, a little hoarse from the long silence, came alive. Burning through the night, we're chasing the light. The words flowed easily, as if she had never left the stage. Her body remembered how to move to the rhythm, how to hold the microphone, how to breathe in time with the music. Casey pounded out the rhythm with such energy that it seemed the drums would fly apart, and Leela added soft but powerful chords that wove into the melody like threads in a tapestry. Ryan stood next to her, playing with the same passion he had a decade ago, his fingers dancing across the strings, his eyes finding Emma every now and then. When the song ended, there was silence in the studio, and then Casey burst into whistles. Damn, Em, you're still hot. She jumped up, clapping her hands. I thought you only sang lullabies now. Emma laughed, feeling the adrenaline rush through her veins. Well, I'm pretty good at lullabies too. Ryan walked closer, his guitar still slung over his shoulder. You're not just in shape, Em. It's like you never left. His voice was soft, but there was an intimacy to it that made her heart skip a beat. Thank you, she looked away, feeling warmth spread across her cheeks. But I'm definitely rusty. I'll need to practice. Practice? Ryan grinned, leaning in a little closer. You could still give half these new pop stars a run for their money. Remember when we rocked Vegas? You walked out on stage in that silver jacket, and the crowd just went wild. Emma smiled, memories flooding back. Vegas, 2012. They'd played a festival, and afterward, they'd drank tequila until dawn, dancing under the stars. There had been something between her and Ryan, then not a relationship, but sparks that might have ignited if she'd never met Jake. She pushed the thoughts away, but Ryan, as if sensing her nostalgia, continued. Remember when we got stuck in that van in Arizona? He laughed, his eyes shining. You were singing, Sweet Child O' Mine throughout the desert, so as not to go crazy. Oh God, don't remind me, Emma shook her head, but her laugh was genuine. I nearly lost my voice that time. But you were alive, Em, Ryan said, his voice growing serious. You were always like this, not like those housewives with their yoga and smoothies. Emma felt her smile freeze. His words had stung her, though she wasn't sure if he'd intended to. She wanted to protest, to say that her life wasn't all smoothies and yoga, that she had a family, kids, Jake. But instead, she just shrugged. Life changes, Ryan, she said, trying to sound light. But I'm here, aren't I? And thank God, he winked, but there was something in his gaze that made her feel vulnerable. The rehearsal continued and Emma became immersed in the music. They played 3 more songs, Break the Sky, Fever Dream and a slow ballad, Afterglow, which Emma had always loved for its melancholy depth. With every chord, with every word, she felt her old self come alive. Her voice, hesitant at first, grew stronger, filling the studio with an energy she had almost forgotten. She caught Ryan's glances, his smiles, and each time her heart beat a little faster. It wasn't just nostalgia, it was a feeling of freedom she hadn't felt in years. When rehearsal was over, the band gathered in a corner of the studio to discuss plans. Tony was waving his notebook around, scribbling down dates and cities, but Emma was only half listening. Her mind was somewhere between the stage and home. She imagined telling Jake about rehearsal, the sound of her voice again, the crowd screaming her name. But she was also thinking about Sophie, probably doing her homework, and Liam, probably building something out of Lego again. And Jake, whose silence over dinner still rang in her ears. Hey, Em, are you in? Ryan's voice broke her out of her thoughts. He was sitting next to her, holding a bottle of water and looking at her with a hint of amusement. Or are you already dreaming about the stage at Madison Square Garden? Ha, maybe, she smiled, but her voice was quieter than she intended. It's just, A lot of things have come up. I see, Ryan nodded, but his eyes said he didn't quite get it. You know, when I found out you agreed to do the tour, I thought, oh, here she is back. You missed that, right? Emma looked at him, trying to find the right words. Did she miss him? Yes, absolutely. But it wasn't that simple. Her life was different now, stable, predictable, safe. And yet, standing here, among the guitars and amps, she felt more alive than ever. I missed you, she admitted, but then added, but I have a different life now, Ryan. Kids, a house, a husband. Husband, he repeated the word with a slight grin, but quickly raised his hands in surrender. Hey, I'm not butting in. I'm just saying the stage is your place. You were born for this. Emma wanted to protest, but something in his words caught her. She thought of her life at home, the endless laundry, the school meetings, the way she sometimes fell asleep feeling like the day had been wasted. This was a different scene. This was hers. Maybe you're right, she said quietly, almost in a whisper. Ryan smiled, but didn't pursue the topic. Instead, he offered, let's go get some coffee. There's a place around here that makes lattes, like in the old days. You know, when we'd have coffee at 3 in the morning after shows. Emma hesitated. Part of her wanted to agree, to embrace this ease, this world without schedules or responsibilities. But another part of her, the part that remembered the look in Jake's eyes at dinner, held her back. Maybe another time, she said, trying to sound casual. I need to get home. The kids, you know. Kids, Ryan nodded, but there was a hint of disappointment in his voice. Okay, Em, but you're not getting away from us that easily. We're still going to rock. She smiled, but her heart sank. She said goodbye to the group, promising to return in 2 days, and walked out into the street. Hollywood was as vibrant as ever, neon signs, street musicians, crowds of tourists. But Emma felt disconnected. She pulled out her phone and dialed Jake's number. He answered after the third ring, his voice sounding tired. Hey, Em, how was rehearsal? Okay, she said, trying to sound enthusiastic. Even better than I expected. My voice, it's still there, Jake. We played Wildfire, and it was like I went back 10 years. Cool, he said, but his tone was reserved. Good for you. Emma frowned, feeling the distance between them growing, though she couldn't understand why. Are you okay? She asked. You seem kind of, I don't know, it's distant. Just busy, he replied. Project at work, you know, deadline looming. Oh, Emma nodded, even though he couldn't see her. Okay, I'll be home in an hour. Maybe we can watch something with the kids. Maybe, he said, but I'll probably work some more. See you at home. He hung up, and Emma was left standing on the sidewalk, staring at her phone. His coldness hurt her, but she pushed the feeling away. He was just busy, she told herself. He was always busy. She pocketed the phone and walked to the car, the chords still playing in her head. Wildfire and Ryan's voice saying she was born for the stage. It was raining cats and dogs in Seattle, but the club Zenith showbox was burning with heat, as if the air itself had caught fire. The crowd, dense and pulsating like a single organism, shouted and clapped until Neon Pulse were giving it their all. The spotlights bathed the stage in purple and red light, reflecting off the shiny surfaces of the guitars and drums. Emma Clark stood in the center, her voice, powerful and husky, cutting through the air like a knife. She sang Wildfire, their biggest hit, and every chord, every breath she took sent a wave of excitement through the crowd. Her black leather jacket, pulled out of her closet for the first time in years, shone under the lights, and her hair, loose and slightly damp with sweat, fluttered as she moved to the beat. Emma was in her element, a fish finally released into the ocean. Burning through the night, we're chasing the light. Her voice soared, and the crowd joined in, turning the words into a hymn. She felt their energy, their hunger, their love. It wasn't just singing, it was life, real, unbridled, like she hadn't felt in a long time. Ryan, standing just behind her, delivered a sharp guitar solo, his fingers moving with such ease that it was as if the strings were an extension of his body. He caught her eye and winked, his smile both cheeky and warm. Casey, on the drums, pounded out the rhythm with furious energy, her tattooed arms flashing like lightning. Leela, buried in her keys, added depth to the melody, and Marcus, the silent bassist, held the foundation while letting the rest shine. It was magic, and Emma was part of it again. When the last note, Wildfire, vanished into thin air, the crowd burst into applause. Emma, breathing heavily, raised her hand in greeting. "Her name is Emma, Emma," thundered through the hall, and she felt her heart beat in unison with this cry. She looked at Ryan, who was already taking off his guitar, and he nodded to her, as if to say, "You're back." Emma smiled, but something else stirred in her chest, a shadow of doubt, a memory of home, of Jake, of the children. But she brushed it aside, letting the euphoria of the concert carry her away. After the show, the band, tired but charged with adrenaline, gathered in the dressing room. The room was cramped, with peeling paint on the walls and an old sofa that smelled of beer and sweat. On the table were bottles of water, a couple of beers, and a bowl of crisps that one of the roadies had dragged in. Emma, still in her leather jacket, sat on the edge of the sofa, wiping sweat from her forehead with a towel. Her cheeks were flushed, and her eyes were shining. "Damn, Em, you tore the place apart." Casey plopped down next to me, popping open a beer with a hiss. "I'm serious. I thought those people were going to tear the stage apart." "Oh, come on," Emma laughed, but her voice shook with excitement. "I was afraid I'd forget the words or trip over the cable." "Trip? You?" Leela rolled her eyes, sitting on the floor with a bottle of water. Her purple hair was pulled back into a messy bun, and a bead of sweat glistened on her cheek. "You were like a hurricane. I even forgot my part in Fever Dream because I was looking at you." Emma smiled, feeling the warmth of their words. She glanced at Ryan, who was standing against the wall, lazily sipping his beer. He caught her eye and raised the bottle in a toast. "To the queen of the stage," he said, his voice soft but slightly mocking. "Welcome back, Em." "Thanks, guys." She raised her bottle of water, clinking it with Casey's. "I really didn't think it would be so powerful." "Powerful? That's putting it mildly." Marcus, usually silent, finally spoke up. His beard was glistening with sweat, his eyes serious. "It was like you never left. We all felt it." Emma nodded, but her thoughts wandered back home. She pictured Sophie, probably watching a soap opera, and Liam, probably asleep, cuddling his dinosaur toy. And Jake, she didn't know what he was doing. Maybe working on his plans, maybe thinking about her. She pushed the thoughts away and forced herself to smile. "Okay, gang." Tony stumbled into the dressing room, his jacket unbuttoned and his face beaming. "You just gave me the best night I've had in 10 years. Seattle is in ecstasy. Nashville is sold out. Time to celebrate. There's a bar across the street, the Rusty Anchor. Come on, I'm treating you." Casey jumped up, ready for adventure, and Leela and Marcus exchanged glances but nodded. Emma hesitated. She wanted to go home, to the phone, to Jake, but the band's energy was infectious. And besides, it was her first concert in years. She deserved to have some fun, right? "Okay," she said, standing up, "but only for an hour. I have to get up early tomorrow." "Oh, Em, don't be a nerd." Ryan walked up to her, his smile teasing. "One cocktail doesn't make you a bad mom." She rolled her eyes, but couldn't help but smile. "I'm not a bore, Logan. I just have obligations." "Commitments," he repeated the word, as if tasting it, and winked. "Come on, commitments can wait." The Rusty Anchor was typical Seattle dark wood, dim lights, the smell of whiskey and fried chicken wings. A jukebox played an old hit in the corner, Nirvana, while behind the bar a bartender with a shark tattoo on his neck lazily polished glasses. The group occupied a corner table littered with sticky coasters and nutshells. Tony ordered a cocktail for everyone, calling it a tour tradition, and soon the table was filled with glasses of something bright green that smelled suspiciously of lime and tequila. Emma took a sip, wincing at the harsh taste. "Tony, is this nuclear waste?" she asked, and everyone laughed. "This green fire, baby." Tony raised his glass. in honor of our triumph. Emma smiled, but her gaze slid to Ryan, who was sitting across from her, idly twirling his glass. He was looking at her, and there was something in his eyes that made her heart beat faster. Not lust, not quite, but something dangerously close to it: interest, nostalgia, a spark. "So, he began, leaning closer so his voice could be heard over the music. "How does it feel to be on stage again? Do you feel alive?" She nodded, taking another sip to buy herself time. "It's like I woke up after a long sleep. Like I forgot who I was, and today I remembered." Ryan smiled, but his smile wasn't as easy as before. "You never belonged in the suburbs, he said, and his voice was more serious than she expected. "All those picket fences and school assemblies and scheduled dinners, that's not you. You're the fire. You're the stage." Emma felt his words dig into her like needles. She wanted to protest, to tell her that her life was more than just suburbia, that she loved her children, that she loved Jake. But something about his words stung. She remembered turning down a trip to Europe 10 years ago because Jake had proposed. It had seemed like the right thing to do then: love, family, stability. But now, sitting here, cocktail in hand, the echo of the crowd in her ears, she wondered, what if she'd made a mistake? "Maybe you're right," she said quietly, almost in a whisper. "But I can't just give up and give up." "Nobody's talking about quitting," Ryan shrugged, but his eyes never left hers. "I'm just saying you need to be where you belong, and your place is here, with us, with the music." Emma looked at him, trying to figure out what he meant. His words were both seductive and dangerous, like a melody you want to sing, but are afraid you'll forget the words too. She took a sip of her drink, feeling the warmth spread through her body. "Ryan, you always had a way with words," she said, trying to bring some lightness back into the conversation. "But I'm not the girl who sang in Vegas until dawn." "I don't think that girl went anywhere." He leaned in even closer, his voice lower. "She just hid. But I saw her today, and she was cool as hell." Emma laughed, but it was a nervous laugh. She felt something building between them, not quite flirting, but close. She pulled away, trying to put up a barrier, but her body, her heart, her mind, everything was reaching out for this feeling of freedom he offered. "Okay, rock star," she said, standing up. "I have to go. There's another concert tomorrow." "Running away already?" Ryan raised an eyebrow, but didn't stop her. "Okay, but I'll hold you to my word: one more cocktail in Nashville." "We'll see," she smiled, but her heart was pounding. She said goodbye to the group, hugged Casey and Leela, nodded to Marcus and Tony, and walked outside. It was still raining, and Emma, standing under the canopy of the bar, took out her phone. She opened a video of the concert that one of the technicians had recorded and sent it to Jake. Today was Seattle. It was incredible, she wrote, adding a fire emoji. She waited for a response, watching the raindrops trickle down the sidewalk. A few minutes later, her phone beeped. It was Jake. One emoji, a thumbs up. Emma frowned, feeling something tighten inside her. She'd expected more words, emotion, something to show that he was there, that he understood. But that smiley face was like a wall, cold and impenetrable. She shoved her phone into her pocket and stepped out into the rain, letting the water wash away her disappointment. But deep down, she knew the distance between her and Jake was growing, and that scared her more than she cared to admit. The Los Angeles morning sun streamed through the large windows of the Clark's house, casting a warm golden glow over the living room. The air was filled with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and burnt toast. For all his engineering talents, Jake Clark had never mastered the art of the perfect breakfast. He stood at the stove, trying to salvage yet another piece of toast, while his children, Sophie and Liam, bustled around the kitchen table. Sophie was glued to her phone, scrolling through videos, her curls pulled back into a messy ponytail, and Liam, with the enthusiasm of an 8-year-old inventor, was constructing a semblance of a tower out of bread and peanut butter. "Dad, did you burn the toast again?" Sophie looked up from the screen, her voice full of teenage irony. "Mom should have left us instructions." "Hey, I can handle it." Jake turned, waving his spatula like a conductor's baton. These aren't burnt, they're crispy, new style. Liam giggled, smearing peanut butter across his fingers. Dad, this is coal. Can I use it for my rocket? Rockets? Jake raised an eyebrow, placing a plate of toast in front of the kids that, to his credit, was only lightly toasted. Eat first, then we build rockets. And no peanut butter on the couch, okay? Deal, Liam nodded, but his eyes were already shining with another idea. Sophie rolled her eyes, but still put her phone down and picked up the toast. Jake sat at the table, sipping his coffee, and looked at his children. Sophie, with her sharp tongue and inquisitive mind, was so much like Emma in her youth, the same sparkle, the same challenge in her eyes. Liam, on the other hand, had inherited his own passion for creating, for taking things apart to understand how they worked. These two were his world, his anchor, but today his thoughts were elsewhere in Seattle with Emma, who was probably sleeping in a hotel room after a concert. He received her message last night, a video from a concert where she sang. Wildfire, her voice, her energy, her smile, it was all so familiar, yet foreign. He sent her an emoji because he didn't know what to say. Cool. I'm proud of you. Any word seemed too small for what he felt. He was happy for her, he really was. But something else was gnawing at him deep down, the fear that she would come back different. Or not at all. Dad, are you okay? Sophie's voice broke his thoughts. She looked at him, her brows furrowed. You're staring into space again. Me? Jake smiled, trying to sound nonchalant. Just thinking about how to make the toast less crispy next time. Yeah, right, Sophie snorted, but her gaze was attentive. It's about Mom, right? You miss her. Jake froze, his fingers tightening around his mug. Sophie had always been perceptive, sometimes too perceptive. Of course I miss her, he said, trying to sound light. But she's doing what she loves. That's important. She's so cool, Sophie perked up, her eyes lighting up. I watched her video yesterday. Dad, did you see it? She's like a total rock star. I saw, Jake nodded, his smile softening a little. She was always a star. Liam, who had been busy with his tower, suddenly raised his head. Why did Mom leave? She can sing at home. Jake looked at his son, and his heart sank. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that sometimes people need more than a home? Sometimes, he began, choosing his words carefully, people need to get back to what makes them happy. Like you, when you build your rockets. Mom is happy when she sings. Liam frowned as he thought about it. But she is happy with us, right? Sure, Jake patted his head. But singing is her rocket. Now finish your meal, we've got a busy day ahead of us. After breakfast, Jake took the kids to school and headed to the office. His company, Aerotech, occupied a modern building in downtown Los Angeles, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the skyscrapers. Jake was working on a new drone project, light, autonomous, capable of delivering cargo to hard-to-reach areas. It was his passion, his way of leaving a mark on the world, and he was good at it. But today his thoughts were as scattered as the clouds he could see from his office window. On his lunch break, he met a colleague, Matt, in the cafeteria on the ground floor. Matt, a stocky guy with a permanent beard and a habit of speaking louder than necessary, had been his friend since college. They were sitting at a table eating sandwiches when Matt, noticing Jake's thoughtfulness, decided to comment on it. So, man, he began, taking a bite of his sandwich. How's your rock star doing? Tearing up Seattle. Jake smiled, but his smile was forced. Yeah, it's a blast. She sent me a video from the concert yesterday. They rocked it. Cool, Matt nodded, but his eyes narrowed. Hey, aren't you afraid she'll, go wild? The tour, the band, the whole rock and roll thing. There's probably guys hanging out with her. Jake felt his jaw tighten. He put down his sandwich and looked at Matt, his gaze hard. Emma's not like that, he said, his voice colder than he expected. She knows what she's doing. Hey, no offense, Matt said, holding up his hands in surrender. It's just, I've seen how touring like this changes people. My sister once went off with some indie band, came back 3 months later with a dragon tattoo and a new boyfriend. I'm just saying, be on your guard. Thanks for the advice, Jake said, his tone making it clear the conversation was over. But Matt's words had hurt him more than he cared to admit. He trusted Emma, always had. But the thought of her out there, in this world of music and freedom, with people who knew her differently, was like a splinter. When Jake got home that evening, he decided to do some cleaning to distract himself. The kids were at their grandmother's, and the house seemed unusually quiet. He was sorting through boxes in the storage room when he came across an old album, a tattered leather book that he and Emma hadn't opened in years. He sat down on the floor, brushed the dust off the cover, and began flipping through it. The photographs were like a portal into the past. There was Emma on stage in Chicago, her hair a bright red, her eyes shining, the crowd in front of her a sea of arms. There she was with Ryan, laughing and hugging each other after the show. There she was in the van, sleeping, her head on her guitar. Jake looked at the pictures, his heart aching with a mixture of love and pain. He remembered the first time he saw her, at a bar in Santa Monica. Neon Pulse performed in front of a bunch of drunken students. She sang with such passion that he couldn't take his eyes off her. And then, when she came down from the stage and ordered a beer, he plucked up the courage to talk to her. She laughed at his joke, and he knew he was screwed. But he also remembered how she chose him. In 2014, Neon Pulse were offered a tour of Europe, their big chance. Emma was at a crossroads, and Jake, then just a guy who loved her, said, "I don't want you to give up your dream for me." But she refused. She chose him, their future, their family. And now, looking at these photos, he wondered, did she regret it? He closed the album, but the images wouldn't go away. He stood up, feeling the weariness settle on his shoulders, and went into the living room. Liam had already returned from his grandmother's and was fiddling with his telescope by the window. Jake smiled as he watched his son adjust the lenses with a serious expression. "Dad, come here." Liam waved at him. "I found Jupiter." Jake walked over, sat down next to her, and looked through the telescope. The planet hung in the night sky, distant and bright, surrounded by tiny dots, its satellites. "Cool, Liam," he said, patting his son on the head. "You're going to be an astronomer if you keep this up." "Yeah, or I'll build a rocket and fly there." Liam smiled, his eyes shining. "Dad, why are the stars so far away?" Jake looked at his son, his thoughts drifting back to Emma. "Because they're special," he said quietly. "Sometimes you have to let go of what you love to see if it'll come back." Liam frowned, clearly not understanding. "What do you mean, let go? Are you talking about Mom?" Jake froze, not expecting such a question. He smiled, but his smile was sad. "No, just about the stars. Come on, it's time to sleep." He laid Liam down, but the words he had said echoed in his head. He walked back into the living room, looked out the window at the stars, and felt the shadow of the past growing heavier. Emma had been his star, but now she was shining far away, and he wasn't sure if she would come back the same. Nashville Metnian pulse buzzing with country and rock and roll energy. The city streets, bathed in warm lantern light, rang with laughter and music emanating from the bars on Broadway. The Club Bluebird, the legendary venue where stars once got their start, was packed. The crowd, from local musicians to tourists in cowboy hats, was packed to capacity, and the air was thick with anticipation. Emma Clark stood backstage, her fingers nervously fiddling with the hem of the black, low-cut t-shirt she'd worn in place of her usual leather jacket. Her voice sounded clearer tonight, stronger than it had in Seattle, and she knew this concert would be another triumph. But inside, there was a storm raging, one she tried to ignore. Rehearsals in Nashville were intense. Emma had been with the band nearly around the clock in recent days, refining old songs and adding new arrangements. Ryan Logan, as always, was at the center of the chaos, his guitar setting the tone, his energy infectious. He and Emma increasingly found themselves hanging out after rehearsals to discuss the setlist or just chat about the past. These conversations started out innocently tour memories, jokes about a broken-down van in Arizona, laughing about the time Casey spilled beer on an amp. But with each passing day, their conversations became more personal, and Emma felt the invisible line between friendship and something more growing thinner. "Hey, Em, ready to rock Nashville?" Ryan's voice pulled her out of her thoughts. He was standing next to her, adjusting the strap of his guitar, his dark hair falling in his eyes, his smile as cocky and warm as ever. "I'm ready," Emma nodded, trying to concentrate. "But if I forget the words again, break the sky, you're covering for me, okay?" "Always," he winked, his gaze lingering on her a little longer than necessary. "You seem different today. Is everything okay?" Emma shrugged, looking away. She didn't want to talk about what was eating at her Jake's smiley face, his cold responses, the feeling that the home she'd left in Los Angeles was growing more distant. "I'm just tired," she lied. "Rehearsals, you know." "Yeah, sure." Ryan narrowed his eyes, but didn't press. "Okay, let's show these cowboys what real rock is." The concert was deafening. The crowd in the Bluebird came alive from the first note, and Emma, standing under the bright spotlights, felt her body and voice merge with the music. She sang as if she was pouring out everything that had accumulated inside her: longing, joy, doubt. Ryan, playing next to her, picked up her energy, his guitar riffs weaving into her voice, creating something more than just a song. Casey on the drums set the rhythm that drove the blood through her veins, and Leela and Marcus held the melody like the foundation of a skyscraper. When they reached Fever Dream, Emma looked out into the room and saw a sea of faces screaming her name. It was intoxicating, like a sip of whiskey after a long day. After the show, the band, still pumped with adrenaline, stayed in the dressing room. The room was small, with threadbare carpet and mirrors framed by light bulbs, half of which didn't work. On the table sat a bottle of bourbon, a gift from the club owner, a few plastic cups, and a bowl of pretzels. Emma sat on a chair, her hair damp with sweat, her t-shirt stuck to her back. She felt alive but vulnerable, as if the stage had exposed not just her voice, but her soul. "So, Em," Casey plopped down on the couch, holding a glass of bourbon, "you've officially reclaimed your throne. I saw those guys in the front row almost crying." "Stop it," Emma laughed, but her cheeks turned red. "It's all you. I'm just singing." "Just singing." Leela, sitting on the floor, rolled her eyes. "Today you were like Madonna and Janis Joplin in one bottle." "I'm serious." Emma smiled, but her gaze slid to Ryan, who was standing against the wall, sipping his bourbon. He was looking at her with the same soft smile that always made her feel too exposed. "Let's go celebrate," he suggested, nodding toward the door. "There's a bar right here that serves the best bourbon in town." "One glass, Em. You've earned it." Emma hesitated. She wanted to say no, to go back to the hotel, to call Jake, to check on the kids. But the euphoria of the concert was still surging through her veins, and the thought of prolonging the evening was too tempting. "One glass," she agreed, standing up. "But I'm serious, Ryan. I have rehearsal tomorrow." "I promise not to keep you until dawn." He raised his hands, feigning innocence, but his eyes were shining. The bar was a stone's throw from the club, one of those places that smelled of whiskey, leather, and history. The wooden walls were covered with old guitars and photos of musicians, and in the corner there was a live band playing something like Leonard Skynyrd. Emma and Ryan took a table in the corner, away from the noisy crowd. Casey, Leela, and Marcus decided to stay in the dressing room, citing fatigue, and Emma suddenly realized that she was alone with Ryan. "What are we drinking?" Ryan raised his glass of bourbon, his voice soft but filled with genuine warmth. "To Nashville." Emma clinked glasses with him, feeling the warmth of the alcohol spread through her body, and for not forgetting the words. "That's worth a drink," he laughed, but his eyes were serious. "You know, Em, I always think about how we used to perform. You were, I don't know, like you could set the world on fire with just one look." Emma felt her cheeks warm and took a sip of bourbon to hide her embarrassment. "You're exaggerating," she said, but her voice was quieter than she intended. "I was just a girl with a microphone." "No," Ryan shook his head, leaning closer. You were more than that, and you still are. I saw you today. You weren't just singing, you were living. His words struck a chord deep inside her. She remembered turning down a European tour for Jake 10 years ago. She'd thought she was making the right choice, that love and family were more important than the stage. But now, sitting here with a bourbon in her hand and Ryan looking at her as if he saw the real her, she began to doubt. Jake didn't understand her, did he? His smiley faces, his short answers, his silence, all of it seemed like proof that he didn't see her as she was on stage today. You always had a way of saying nice things, she said, trying to bring some lightness back into the conversation. But I'm not who I was, Ryan. I have kids, a husband, a house. Home, he repeated the word as if it were a foreign language. Do you really think the suburbs are your place? I'm not saying you're a bad mother or anything, but you're more than that. You've always been more. Emma looked at him, her heart pounding. She wanted to argue, to say that her life with Jake and the kids was what she had chosen, that she loved them, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she finished her bourbon, feeling it burn in her throat, and ordered another. They talked for another hour, jumping from reminiscing about old tours to discussing music and life. Ryan talked about his solo project, how he almost signed a major label deal, but turned it down because he didn't want to lose his freedom. Emma listened, but her thoughts were jumbled. The bourbon, the euphoria of the concert, his voice, it all created a dangerous cocktail that was drawing her in deeper. When they returned to the dressing room to get her bag, the club was empty. The crew was putting away equipment, and the smell of sweat and electricity still hung in the air. Emma felt a little dizzy, not from the alcohol, but from how close Ryan stood to her, the way his hand accidentally brushed against hers as he opened the door. "Are you okay?" he asked when they were in the dressing room. His voice was soft, but there was concern in it. "Yes," she lied, but her voice wavered. She turned to him, and their eyes met. There was something in his eyes she couldn't ignore: desire, nostalgia, the promise of freedom. He began, but didn't finish. Instead, he stepped closer, and before she could stop herself, his lips were on hers. The kiss was short but electric, like a cord that cuts right through her. Emma felt her body respond, her hands reaching for him, but after a second she pulled away, her breathing heavy. "No," she whispered, stepping back. "We can't." Ryan froze, his eyes full of a mixture of surprise and regret. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't mean to. Shit, Em, I just—" "Don't," she raised her hand, stopping him. "It's my fault. I need to go." She grabbed her bag and almost ran out of the dressing room, her heart pounding as if it wanted to burst out of her chest. It was chilly outside, and she took a breath of the night air, trying to calm herself. She felt like she had crossed an invisible line, and now there was no turning back. At the hotel, she sat on her bed, still shaking. She pulled out her phone and opened the gallery to a photo of her family: Jake, Sophie, and Liam on the beach in Malibu, laughing, sand on their cheeks. She looked at the photo, and guilt washed over her like a wave. She wanted to call Jake, tell him everything, apologize. But instead, her fingers typed a message to Ryan. "We need to talk," sent it without thinking, and immediately regretted it. But it was too late. The line had been crossed. In the office Aratector was an air of quiet triumph. The glass walls of the conference room reflected the early LA sun, turning the room into a kaleidoscope of light. Jake Clark stood by the picture window, looking out at the city below, but his mind was far from the skyscrapers and traffic. Today, his team was completing the final tests of a prototype drone, a project he'd been working on for the past 2 years. It wasn't just any drone, but a revolutionary machine capable of delivering medical supplies to remote areas with a precision no one had ever achieved before. For Jake, this wasn't just a job, it was his passion, his way of leaving his mark on the world, the way stars leave their mark on the night sky. But today, even that victory seemed dim. The entire team, engineers, designers, programmers, was gathered in the conference room, and the air was buzzing with excited conversation. The table was littered with blueprints, 3D models, and laptops with graphs showing successful tests. The focus was on Jake, whose idea was the basis for the project. His colleagues clapped him on the shoulder, and his boss, Dr. Elizabeth Rivera, a sharp-eyed woman with a severe bun, raised a glass of champagne, a rare exception on a workday. "Jake," she began, her voice firm but warm, "this project is your triumph. You're not just an engineer, you're a visionary. To you and to the future we're building." The team burst into applause, and Jake smiled, raising his glass. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, and his shirt, as always, a little wrinkled, but there was genuine pride in his brown eyes. "Thank you," he said, his voice calm but strong. "It wasn't just me. We all put our hearts into it. And damn it, we did it." Laughter and clapping filled the room, but Jake felt detached, as if he were watching from the outside. His thoughts were with Emma, who was now in Nashville, halfway across the country, living the life he'd once seen only in old photographs. Her last text, a short video from a concert where she sang with such passion that it took his breath away, was still vivid in his mind. He'd responded with a smiley face because the words had felt too heavy. But now he wished he hadn't. She deserved better. After the award ceremony, the winner was presented with a shiny glass statuette with an engraving for innovation in aerospace engineering. Jake walked back into his office. The walls were covered with sketches of drones, and on the table sat a prototype model, a small but exact replica of his creation. He sat down, placed the statue on the table, and looked at it. It should have brought him joy, but instead he felt empty. His phone vibrated, and Emma's name appeared on the screen. Jake's heart skipped a beat. "Hey," he replied, trying to sound casual, like Nashville. Her voice came from the other end of the line, but it was not as bright as usual. "Nashville, it's amazing," Emma said, but there was something strained in her tone, like she was choosing her words carefully. "The concert last night was incredible. The crowd was going crazy. I didn't even think it would be like this." "Cool," Jake nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "I watched your video. You were, as always, awesome." "Thank you." She paused, and there was something in that pause that made him wary. "And how are you? How are the children?" "The kids are fine," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Sophie's still raving about your videos, and Liam's building some kind of rocket out of Lego. I'm trying not to burn down the kitchen, as usual." Emma laughed, but it was short, almost forced. "You're doing fine, Jake. You always do." He wanted to ask what was wrong, why her voice sounded like she was hiding something. But instead he said, "Are you okay, Em? You sound, I don't know, tired." "It's just a tour," she answered quickly, too quickly. "Rehearsals, shows, it's all exhausting. But I'm fine. Really." Jake nodded, even though his instincts screamed that she wasn't telling the whole truth. He knew Emma too well, her voice, her intonations, her pauses. Something was wrong, but he didn't want to push. Not now, not over the phone, with thousands of miles between them. "Okay," he said softly. "Just take care of yourself, okay?" "Of course." Her voice became a little warmer. "I'll call tomorrow, okay? Kiss the kids for me." "Of course," he replied, and the line went silent. He put the phone down on the table and stared at the statue. His fingers moved around it automatically, but his mind was elsewhere. He remembered their conversation before she left, her eyes full of both excitement and fear. He told her he would support her, that he wanted her to be happy. But now he wasn't sure that was true. He wanted her to be happy, but not at the cost of their family. And yet, something in her voice, in her distance, told him she was slipping away. The office was quiet, most of his colleagues already gone, celebrating their success. But Jake stayed. He opened his laptop and began scrolling through the test data, even though he knew everything was perfect. Work had always been his sanctuary, a place where he could control the chaos, where lines and numbers made sense. But today, even that didn't help. His thoughts kept returning to Emma, to her video, to her voice, and to what Matt had said in the cafeteria a few days ago. She might go wild. Jake had brushed the thought aside then, But now it was coming back like a pesky fly. He didn't want to believe it. Emma wasn't like that. She loved him, she loved the kids. But he couldn't ignore the way her texts had changed shorter, less frequent, almost formal. And that call, her voice wasn't just tired. There was something else in it, guilt. Fear, he didn't know. Matt walked in, holding a coffee and a folder of documents. "You're still here?" He raised an eyebrow, sitting on the edge of the table. "Old man, you just got an award, and you're sitting here like the world has ended. What happened?" "Nothing," Jake shrugged, but his tone was too harsh. Matt, used to his restraint, did not back down. "Yeah, right," he sipped his coffee. "It's because of Emma, right? How's her tour going? Is she an MTV star already?" Jake looked at him, his jaw tensing. "She's in Nashville. Everything is fine." "Okay, you say?" Matt narrowed his eyes. "Look, I don't want to pry, but the tour, the musicians, the whole rock and roll thing. Are you sure she's not, carried away?" Jake felt the blood rush to his temples. He clenched his fists, but his voice remained calm. "Matt, stop. Emma is not like that, and I don't want to discuss it." Okay, Matt raised his hands in surrender. "It's just that I've seen things like that change people. You know how it is. Alcohol, adrenaline, old friends." I said enough. Jake looked at him, his gaze cold as steel. "If you have something to say, say it. But don't you dare talk about her like that." Matt paused, clearly sensing that he had crossed a line. He nodded and walked out, leaving Jake alone. But Matt's words had already done their job. They were like poison, slowly seeping into his thoughts. Jake trusted Emma, but he wasn't blind. He knew that the tour was about more than just music. It was a world of temptation, of freedom, of the past she had once loved most. He got home late, after the kids were asleep. The house was quiet, too quiet without Emma. Jake walked into the living room, where the photo album he'd found the other day was still on the table. He hadn't opened it again, but its very presence was a reminder of who Emma had been before their marriage. He sat down on the couch, pulled out his phone, and started texting. I watched your video. You're incredible. I always knew you were meant to be on stage. I'm proud of you, I really am. But I miss you. Not just you, but us. Call me when you can. I'm always here." He reread the text, his finger hovering over the send button. But something stopped him. He didn't want to seem weak, didn't want to pressure her. She needed to be free to find herself, even if that meant she'd find someone else. He erased the message and put the phone on the table. Instead, he stood up and walked out into the backyard. The sky was filled with stars, and he remembered the words he had said to Liam. "Sometimes you have to let go of what you love to see if it will come back." He didn't know if Emma would come back the same, but he decided to give her that freedom, even if it broke his heart. New York City pulsed with life, like a great heart beating to the rhythm of the night. The lights of Times Square twinkled outside the windows of the concert hall, Bowery Ballroom, where Neon Pulse were preparing for the final show of their farewell tour. The venue was packed old-school fans, young people inspired by their music, and casual listeners drawn by the hype, crowded around the stage, their voices merging into a roar like the surf. Emma Clark stood backstage, her fingers fiddling with the hem of her black leather jacket, which now felt like a second skin. Her hair was loose, slightly damp with nervous sweat, and her eyes, lined with dark eyeliner, glowed with a mixture of excitement and fatigue. This was their last show, the culmination of 2 months that had turned her life upside down. She felt both on top of the world and on the edge of an abyss. Ryan Logan was there, as always, tuning his guitar with the casual confidence that had once driven her crazy. His dark hair fell across his forehead, and the smile he gave her was full of promise. Their connection had grown dangerously close in recent weeks. Emma had tried to keep her distance since that kiss in Nashville, but Ryan was like a magnet, his words, his laugh, his looks pulling her back to a time before children, before home-cooked dinners, before quiet evenings with Jake. She sent him a text, "We need to talk," but the conversation never happened. Instead, they continued to spend time together, rehearsing until midnight, sharing memories over coffee or bourbon, letting old sparks burn brighter. You ready?" The voice of Casey, the drummer, broke her out of her thoughts. Casey, with her tattooed arms and short graying hair, looked as ready to fight as ever. "We're going to tear up New York tonight, I promise you." Emma smiled, but her smile was forced. "I hope so, Case. I'm a little exhausted." Exhausted. Leela, the keyboardist, came closer, her purple hair shining under the lights. "Are you kidding? You're in the best shape you've ever been. This tour is your comeback, Em." "Maybe," Emma shrugged, but her gaze slid to Ryan. He caught her eyes and winked, and her heart skipped a beat. She turned away, trying to focus on the stage, on the music, on what was supposed to be her triumph. The concert was electric. From the first note break, the Scythe crowd erupted, and Emma, standing under the spotlight, felt her voice come alive, filling the room. She sang with such passion, as if she were pouring out everything that had pent up over the years, the longing for the stage, the guilt over her family, the confusion of feelings she couldn't control. Ryan, playing next to her, matched her energy, his guitar singing in unison with her voice, creating a harmony that was more than just music. Casey pounded out the rhythm with furious energy, Leela wove the melodies, and Marcus, as always, held the bass line like an anchor in this storm. When they got to Wildfire, their biggest hit, Emma felt her body move on its own, as if the music was controlling her. She closed her eyes, letting the words and chords carry her away. The crowd chanted her name, and in that moment, she wasn't a mother, not a wife, just Emma, the one who had once set stages across the country on fire. She looked at Ryan, and his gaze, full of admiration and something else, made her heart beat faster. It was a moment of pure, unbridled happiness, but underneath it, there was a shadow, a feeling that she was standing on the edge. After the show, the band stayed in the dressing room, still pumped with adrenaline. The room was cramped, with threadbare carpet and mirrors framed by dim light bulbs. On the table sat bottles of beer, bourbon, and a bowl of chips that no one had touched. Emma sat on the couch, her leather jacket casually tossed next to her, holding a bottle of water even though she wanted something stronger. "Damn, Em, you were a blast today." Casey plopped down next to her, cracking open a beer. "I seriously thought the place was going to collapse." "Thank you, Case," Emma smiled, but her voice was quieter than usual. "It was incredible." "Unbelievable." Leela rolled her eyes from her seat on the floor. "It was like we were back in 2012. You took us all back there." Emma nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She could feel Ryan's eyes on her, standing against the wall, sipping his bourbon. He didn't say anything, but his presence was palpable, like an electric charge in the air. Tony, their manager, burst into the dressing room, his face beaming. "Gang, you just made history." He waved his phone, showing social media reviews. "New York is in love with you. We're already talking about an extra show in LA. Emma, are you in?" Emma froze. An extra show? She hadn't thought about it. The tour was supposed to end here in New York. She was supposed to go home to Jake, to the kids. But the idea of prolonging this life, this adrenaline, was too tempting. "I'll think about it," she said, her voice shaking. Tony nodded, not noticing her uncertainty, and continued talking about plans, but Emma was no longer listening. Ryan moved closer, sitting on the arm of the couch. "Hey," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "Let's go celebrate. One last night in New York. We deserve it." Emma looked at him, her heart pounding. She knew she should say no, that she needed to go back to the hotel, call Jake, gather her thoughts. But the euphoria of the concert, the bourbon she'd finally taken from Casey's hand, and the promise in Ryan's eyes had done the trick. "Okay," she said, standing up. "One evening." They walked out of the club into the New York night, where the air smelled of asphalt, coffee, and freedom. The bar they entered was small, dimly lit, with a jukebox playing Tim Waits' the ordered bourbon, and the conversation flowed easily about music, about the tour, about how they had once dreamed of conquering the world. But with every sip, with every glance, the tension between them grew. Emma felt her resistance weaken, her body reaching out to him, to his warmth, to his familiar energy. When they got back to the hotel, it all happened too fast. Ryan walked her to her room, and as he stood at the door, he looked at her again with that look she couldn't ignore. He began, his voice hoarse, almost a whisper. I don't want this to end. The tour, us, all of this. She wanted to answer, to say that it was impossible, that she had a family, a life, commitments. But instead, she stepped toward him, and their lips met. This kiss was not like the one in Nashville. It was deep, desperate, full of everything they had been holding back for weeks. They had gone into her room, and the night had dissolved them. Emma had given herself over to this moment, to this old life, where there were no rules, only music and passion. She felt young, free, alive. But somewhere deep inside, she knew that the price she was paying for it was too high. The next morning, light filtered through the thin curtains, drawing streaks across the hotel room floor. Emma lay in bed, her hair disheveled, her eyes red from crying. Ryan slept beside her, his breathing even, but she couldn't look at him. She stood quietly, wrapped the sheet around her, and went to the window. New York was waking up, but for her, the world had stopped. She had crossed a line, and now there was no turning back. Tears streamed down her cheeks, and she made no attempt to stop them. She remembered Jake, his calm gaze, his silent support. She remembered Sophie, her excited screams, and Liam, who was building rockets out of Lego. She had lost a part of herself, not the one who sang on stage, but the one who was a wife, a mother, a home. And yet, a part of her still wanted to be here, in this world where she was not just Emma Clark, but a star. Ryan woke up, his voice sleepy but soft. Are you okay? She turned to him, her face wet with tears. No, she said quietly. I'm not okay. He sat up, his eyes full of worry. Hey, listen, he began, holding out his hand. What happened yesterday, it was real. I know you have a life, but we could have. We could have been together. The tour is over, but that doesn't mean it has to be. Emma looked at him, and her heart sank. She saw her past in him, the girl who sang herself hoarse, danced in the rain, lived life without looking back. But he was not her future. He was a shadow, a reflection of what she had left behind. No, Ryan, she said, her voice shaking but firm. This was a mistake. I can't. I don't want this. He fell silent, his face darkening. Are you sure? He asked quietly. Because I saw you on stage. You were happy, Em. I'm really happy. Maybe, she nodded, wiping away tears. But that's not all I am. I'm coming home. She gathered her things, trying not to look at him. When he was gone, she sat on the bed and pulled out her phone. Her finger hovered over Jake's name, but she couldn't click. Instead, she opened a photo of them together on the beach, laughing, sand on their cheeks. She looked at the ring on her finger, the simple gold band Jake had put on her finger 10 years ago. I'm sorry, Jake, she whispered, her voice lost in the silence of the room. She knew she had to go back, but she didn't know if she could look him in the eye. Pasadena greeted Emma Clark with a gray dawn, as if the city knew her return would not be triumphant. The plane from New York touched down in Los Angeles early in the morning, and as the taxi drove her through familiar streets, she looked out the window, but saw no palm trees or brightly colored signs. Her thoughts were elsewhere, the suitcase in the trunk, the ring on her finger, and the words she had to say to Jake. 2 months of touring with me and Pulse changed her, but not in the way she expected. She came back not as a star, not as the brash girl who sang herself hoarse, but as a woman whose heart was torn apart by guilt and fear. She had crossed a line in New York, and now that line stood between her and her family like an invisible wall. The Clark's house looked the same as ever, white walls, a neatly trimmed lawn, pots of geraniums by the entryway. But when Emma opened the door, suitcase in hand, the house felt foreign. The smell of freshly brewed coffee, which usually soothed her, now seemed sharp. Liam's toys scattered around the living room and Sophie's drawings taped to the refrigerator looked like artifacts from another life. She set her suitcase by the entryway and paused, listening. The silence was almost tangible, broken only by the ticking of the wall clock. Emma? Jake's voice came from the kitchen, soft but with a subtle edge. She turned to see him standing in the doorway. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, his shirt rumpled, but his face was lit by a smile. Only his eyes, usually warm and alive, were as cold as an autumn morning. "You're back." "Yes," she nodded, trying to smile, but her lips were trembling. "I'm home." He came closer, his steps measured, almost cautious. He put his arm around her, but the embrace was brief, formal, as if he were afraid to linger too long. "The kids are with Grandma," he said, stepping back. "I thought you might want to rest after the flight." "Thank you," Emma swallowed, feeling the lump in her throat get heavier. She wanted to say something else, to ask about the kids, about his work, but the words stuck. Instead, she said, "How are you? I missed you." Jake looked at her, and his gaze was so penetrating that she felt naked. "I'm fine," he replied, his voice even but lacking warmth. "And you? The tour, was it what you expected?" Emma nodded, her fingers fiddling nervously with the strap of her bag. "He was incredible, but," she trailed off, unsure how to continue. She wanted to tell him everything about the stage, about the crowd, about how the music had brought her back to life. But most of all, she wanted to tell him the truth, and that truth was choking her. "Come on," Jake nodded toward the kitchen. "I made some coffee. Tell me how it went." They sat at the table, the same one where they had eaten dinner as a family, laughing at Sophie's jokes and arguing over whose turn it was to wash the dishes. The table seemed too big now, the silence between them too loud. Jake poured her coffee, his movements familiar but lacking the ease she was used to. She picked up the mug, her fingers shaking, and she knew she couldn't put it off any longer. "Jake," she began, her voice barely audible, "I need to tell you something." He looked at her, his eyebrows raised slightly, but his face remained calm. "Okay," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Go ahead." Emma gripped her mug so tightly her knuckles turned white. She had expected it to be difficult, but she hadn't expected the words to feel as heavy as stones. She took a breath, trying to steel herself. "In New York," she trailed off, her eyes falling to the table. I made a mistake. With Ryan, it was only once, but I slept with him." The silence that followed her words was deafening. Emma looked up, expecting to see anger, pain, anything. She braced herself for screams, for accusations, for him to get up and leave. But Jake simply stared at her, his face unmoving, a mask. His eyes, cold and distant, were the only hint of what he was feeling. "Jake," her voice broke, and tears sprang to her eyes. "I don't know how it happened. I was drunk, I was lost. The tour, the music, all of it. It just kind of took me away. But I didn't mean to. I swear it was a mistake." He was silent, and his silence hurt her more than any words. She wanted him to scream, to blame her, to give her a chance to defend herself. But he just sat there, his fingers slowly swirling his mug, his gaze fixed somewhere off to the side. "Please say something," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I know I hurt you. I know it's unforgivable. But I want to make it right." Jake finally looked at her, and his eyes were so empty that she felt her heart squeeze. "I knew," he said quietly, almost in a whisper. "I let you go back when you first looked at the stage with longing." His words hit her like a slap in the face. She had expected anger, but not this calm, almost fatalistic truth. "What do you mean?" Her voice was hoarse, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You knew. How?" "I knew you, Em." He shrugged, and there was something tiredly apologetic in the way he moved. "I saw the way you looked at those old videos, the way your eyes lit up when you talked about the tour. I knew that stage was a part of you I could never fill, and I knew that letting you out there was a risk." Emma shook her head, her hands shaking. "It's not like that, Jake. I chose you. I chose our family. What happened with Ryan, it was a mistake. I don't want him. I want you. I want us." He looked at her, and a shadow of pain flashed in his eyes, but it quickly disappeared, replaced by the same cold emptiness. I believe you didn't mean to, he said. But that doesn't change what happened, and it doesn't change the scene you chose when you left. I didn't choose the scene. Her voice broke, and she jumped up, her fists clenching. I wanted to feel alive, Jake. I wanted to remember who I was before all these dinners and laundry and school assemblies. But that doesn't mean I don't love you or the kids. Jake nodded, but his face remained motionless. I know you love us, he said. But sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes people leave even when they don't want to. His words were like a knife piercing her heart. She wanted to scream. She wanted to grab his hand, to make him understand that she was still here, that she wanted to fight for them. But his calm, his coldness was worse than any anger. She felt him pulling away, their bond, built over the years, snapping like a thin thread. Jake, please. She took a step toward him, her voice full of desperation. I'll do anything to fix this. I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose us. He looked at her, and for a second she thought he would soften, that he would hug her, tell her they could make it. But instead he stood up, his movements slow, almost mechanical. I need time, Em, he said, and his voice was so quiet she could barely hear him. I don't know what's going to happen next, but I need time. He turned and walked into his office, leaving her alone in the kitchen. Emma stood there, her tears dripping onto the table, her coffee growing cold in her hands. She felt like the world was crumbling around her, and she didn't know how to stop it. After a few minutes, she forced herself to get up and follow him. She wanted to talk, she wanted to explain, she wanted to beg. But when she entered the office, her gaze fell on the suitcase, neatly placed in the corner. Jake's things, his shirts, his books, even his favorite mug were folded with the same precision with which he designed his drones. Emma froze, her breath caught in her throat. She glanced at Jake, who was sitting at his desk, staring at his laptop screen, but his eyes were empty. Jake, she began, but her voice broke. Are you leaving? He didn't answer right away, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. I don't know, Em, he said finally, not looking at her. But I can't pretend everything's okay. Not now. Emma felt her legs buckle. She wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she turned and walked out of the office, closing the door behind her. She sank down onto the living room couch, her hands shaking and her tears flowing uncontrollably. The home that had once been her refuge now felt like a cage, and the person she loved most was further away than ever. The night over Pasadena was clear, rare for Los Angeles, where smog often obscured the stars. The sky over the Clark's house was black velvet studded with diamonds, and each star seemed to carry a story of love, of loss, of paths that diverged despite all efforts to hold them together. Emma Clark sat on the porch, her knees pulled up to her chest, her hands clasped around a cup of cold tea. Her eyes, still red from crying, were fixed on the darkness, where the garden dissolved into shadow. She had been home only a day, but this house, once so warm and full of laughter, now seemed like a museum to their past lives. Every detail, the creak of the floorboards, the scent of jasmine from the garden, even the ticking of the clock in the living room, was a reminder of what she had lost. Jake walked out onto the porch, his footsteps almost silent, but Emma felt his presence before he spoke. He sat down next to her on the wooden bench, leaving more than a physical distance between them. His dark hair moved slightly in the wind, and he held a bottle of beer in his hands, unopened. They were silent, and the silence was heavy, like the summer air before a storm. The children were asleep upstairs, Sophie curled up in her pillow, hugging her phone, and Liam cuddling his stuffed dinosaur. Their innocent sleep was the only thing Emma and Jake had left to bond over, but even that felt as fragile as glass. Emma looked at him, searching his face for some hint of what he was feeling. His profile, illuminated by the dim light of the lantern, was so familiar, the sharp cheekbones, the light stubble, the eyes that always saw right through her. But there was something new in those eyes now, something that scared her more than his silence after her confession. It wasn't anger, not resentment, but something deeper: weariness, resignation, farewell. Jake, she began, her voice hoarse, almost a whisper, we need to talk. He nodded without looking at her, his fingers slowly twirling the bottle. "I know," he said, his voice as quiet as hers, "but I'm not sure words will help right now." Her heart sank. She had expected it, but his calm, his detachment, still cut her like a knife. She wanted to scream, she wanted to grab his hand, to make him look at her, but instead she only clutched the cup tighter. "I don't know how to fix this," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "I know I hurt you. I know I don't deserve to be forgiven. But I want us to be a family. I want things to go back to the way they were before." Jake finally turned to face her, and his gaze was so heavy that she felt her breath catch in her throat. There was love in his eyes, the same love that had made her choose him 10 years ago, but it was mixed with a pain so deep that Emma couldn't bear to look at it. He began, his voice soft but firm. "I don't know if we can go back to the way things were. I don't know if I want to." Her tears started flowing, and she didn't try to stop them. "Do you want a divorce?" she asked, her voice shaking, but she forced herself to ask the question. Jake shook his head, his lips pressed into a thin line. "No," he said, "I don't want a divorce. But I'm leaving. I've been hired on a new project in Texas. It's a big contract, Em. They want me to lead the team. I'm leaving in a week." Emma froze, her heart skipping a beat. She had expected many things: anger, blame, even leaving, but not this. Texas. It wasn't just distance, it was another life. "Texas?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "For how long?" "A year, maybe more," he shrugged, his gaze sliding to the stars. "It's not just about work. I need space, time. I can't stay here and pretend everything's okay." Emma felt her world crumble. She wanted to scream, she wanted to beg him to stay, but something in his voice, in his calm, stopped her. She realized that he had already made his decision, even before she returned, even before her confession. It was not anger, not revenge. It was something worse. He was moving away from her, like a ship slowly leaving the harbor. "Jake," she said, reaching out but stopping short of touching him. "I made a mistake. I know it's unforgivable. But I love you. I've always loved you." He looked at her, and his eyes were so full of pain that she felt guilty for every word. "I know you love me," he said quietly, "and I love you. But love, it doesn't always keep people together. You went on tour to find yourself, Em, and I let you go because I thought it would make you happy. But now I see that we're both lost, not because of anything you did, but because we stopped being us before you left." His words were like a blow, but they were true. Emma remembered looking at old videos in the Impulse, how her heart had squeezed with longing for the stage. She remembered how Jake had remained silent when she talked about the tour, how his eyes had grown colder with each text she sent. They had both let go of each other long before New York, long before Ryan. Cheating was a symptom, not a cause. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she whispered, her tears dripping onto the wooden porch. "I thought I could be Emma on stage and the one here with you. I thought I could hold it all together." Jake nodded, his gaze softening but still holding that same tired look. "I thought so too," he said. "But maybe we were both wrong. Maybe we were trying to hold on to something that was already gone." Emma looked at him, her heart breaking. She wanted to say something that would change everything, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she just looked at him, at the man she loved more than anything in the world, and saw a farewell in his eyes. Not angry, not harsh, but quiet, like the stars above them. "What about the kids?" she asked finally, her voice hoarse. "What do we tell Sophie and Liam?" "We'll tell you the truth," Jake said, his voice firm. "That we love them. That we'll always be their parents. But we need time to figure out who we are." Emma nodded, her tears flowing uncontrollably. She wanted to argue, wanted to say that they could fix this, but the truth was, she didn't know how. She remembered New York, the night with Ryan, the euphoria of the stage, and the emptiness that came the next morning. She had been looking for herself, but instead she had lost them. They sat in silence, looking at the stars, the night around them seeming endless. Jake finally stood up. his movements slow, almost reluctant. "I need to check on the project," he said, though they both knew it was just an excuse. "I'll be back tomorrow to talk to the kids." Emma nodded, unable to look at him. She heard him walk down the steps, his footsteps fading into the darkness. She heard the car door opening, the crunch of gravel under the wheels. She didn't turn, didn't run after him. She just sat there, her eyes fixed on the sky, where the stars shone, uncaring of her pain. "I let you go, too," she whispered, her voice fading into the night. She didn't know if she was speaking to Jake, to herself, or to the stars. But it was true. Their marriage had ended not because of cheating, not because of the tour, but because they had both long ago let go of each other, allowing their dreams and longings to lead them in different directions. Jake's car disappeared around the corner, its headlights flashing one last time like a shooting star. Emma was alone, her hands still clutching the cup, tears streaming down her cheeks. The sky above her was endless, full of light and mystery, and she felt small, lost in its vastness. Their breakup was silent but irreversible, like a galaxy that continues to expand, carrying the stars further and further apart. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.